I didn't know it yet, but the house I just bought once belonged to a witch hunter from the 1600s. And what I found in the attic changed everything. Part 1. The house on Hawthorne Hill. The night I first saw the house, the sky above Salem was the color of bruised steel. Rain smeared the windshield into a gray blur, and my wipers could barely keep up. I remember gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white, thinking that no sane person would choose to move into a centuries-old colonial estate in the middle of a thunderstorm. But sanity had very little to do with my decision. I'd left Boston 2 weeks earlier, left the newsroom, the failed engagement, the noise of a life that had stopped feeling like mine. What I wanted was silence, something ancient and grounding. The listing had appeared online like an omen. Historic property, Hawthorne Hill, built 1682, restored, private woods. The photographs showed nothing unusual except the light, how it bent strangely across the front windows as though the house itself were breathing. When the GPS announced I had arrived, I expected to see another colonial replica among the trees. Instead, my headlights struck something far older, the kind of architecture that didn't look built so much as exhumed. The wood siding was blackened by centuries of salt wind. The tall chimney leaned slightly, as though exhausted. A brass plate near the gate read simply, "Thorne House." I laughed out loud, one short, nervous sound. My grandmother's maiden name had been Thorne. I told myself it was coincidence. I killed the engine, opened the car door, and the storm swallowed me whole. Rain hissed through the pines, soaking my hair in seconds. The key waited in a realtor's lockbox on the porch. When I turned it, the door resisted, as if something on the other side had decided it preferred to stay closed. The second twist broke the seal of air and time. The scent hit me first. Dust, pine resin, and a faint metallic undertone like old blood on iron. Inside, the house was frozen between centuries. Exposed beams, a hearth large enough to stand in. The furniture the sellers had left behind was covered in linen sheets that shifted in the draft like ghosts trying to remember their shape. Lightning flared, and for a heartbeat I thought someone was standing in the corner near the staircase, a tall figure in a long coat. When the thunder followed, the corner was empty, only a coat rack. I told myself fatigue was playing tricks. I'd driven 4 hours through rain and regret. Hallucinations came free of charge. The power stuttered once and held. I walked through each room with my phone light, cataloging every creak and sigh. Kitchen, dining hall, 2 bedrooms upstairs. Then I noticed a third staircase, narrow, twisting upward behind a door half hidden by the pantry shelves. The attic. A smell of dry herbs and something else. Ozone, perhaps, drifted from behind the door. My rational mind whispered, tomorrow. But the journalist in me, the one who had chased cold cases through courthouse basements, couldn't leave it alone. I climbed. Each step answered with a hollow groan. The door at the top was swollen with humidity. When I forced it open, dust rained down like gray snow. The attic was a museum of forgotten lives. Trunks, chairs, a child's cradle. I swept my flashlight across rafters and saw the faint outline of symbols burned into the wood. Circles intersected by crude crosses, protective sigils maybe, or warnings. Then the beam caught a chest. It was small, cedar, its metal latch eaten with rust. Someone had wrapped it in a strip of what looked like priest's stole, embroidered with Latin phrases I could half translate. Spiritus in tenebris, spirit in the dark. When I touched the latch, a chill climbed my spine. The lid opened with the brittle sigh of a tomb giving up air. Inside lay relics, a rosary, a pocket knife, a pouch of dried plants, and at the bottom, a thick book bound in cracked leather. The cover was stamped with a single name, Aleric Thorne, and below it, faint but legible, Witch Hunter, 1668. The power went out. For a second, the attic was pure black. I heard something move, soft, deliberate behind me. My flashlight rolled out of my hand, spinning its beam once across the floorboards before dying. And in that dark, just above the sound of the storm, I heard a whisper, almost gentle. Read. As before, picking up at the instant Ellie hears the whisper. Sure, before continuing, I need to stay inside our content rules. I can keep the dark mystery tension, eerie atmosphere, and detective feel, but I'll avoid showing anything gory or graphic. Below is the next continuation of Part 1, The House on Hawthorne Hill, written in the same tone and pacing braiding inside a flute. My heart stumbled. Every instinct screamed run, but the reporter in me, the same one who'd once followed a murder suspect into an abandoned subway tunnel, leaned forward instead. I found the flashlight by touch, smacked the base until the beam blinked back to life, and the attic appeared again in shaky fragments of light. Nothing moved. Dust hung in the air like frozen smoke. "Old houses talk," I whispered, more to steady myself than to explain what had just happened. "They settle. They creak." Yet as I said it, I could swear I heard another sound. Paper. Turning. The diary lay open. Though I hadn't touched it, the pages fluttered as if stirred by breath. I crouched beside the chest and forced myself to look. The handwriting was meticulous, black ink on cream paper that had yellowed at the edges. June the 3rd, 1668. I read aloud without meaning to. "The sickness took another child today. I saw her eyes go dull as river stones. The villagers say a woman in the woods calls the wind. I fear they will hang her before the sun rises." A thunderclap shook the rafters. When the echo died, I could still hear the rhythm of the words inside my head, as though someone else was repeating them from within the walls. I closed the book quickly and carried it downstairs. Logic followed me like a reprimand. I told myself it was just fatigue, just imagination wrapped around a coincidence of wind and memory. But even as I said it, I knew I was lying. I set the book on the kitchen table, made tea with trembling hands, and tried to think. Salem had its share of ghost stories, most of them inflated for tourism. Still, the name Thorne pressed against my mind like a fingerprint I couldn't wipe away. I opened my laptop and searched Aleric Thorne, Salem, 1668. Nothing direct, but the archives referenced a Captain Thorne, a magistrate involved in early witch trials farther north, near Portsmouth. Beneath that, a scan of an unsigned deposition caught my eye. An accusation written in the same careful hand I'd just seen. The tea went cold before I moved again. At midnight, the rain slowed to drizzle. I should have slept, yet the diary seemed to hum against the silence. I opened it once more, drawn as though my pulse had become its metronome. The next entry was different. "Benedict Crow rides at dawn. He says the devil walks among the midwives. I have seen nothing, yet his eyes burn with certainty. I fear what certainty can do." I ran my finger across the ink. It was raised slightly, as if newly written. A thud sounded above. 3 slow knocks. The attic again. I stood, every nerve wired, staring up the staircase. "Rats," I said aloud, though my voice was thin. Still I climbed. The attic door stood open now. A draft licked the back of my neck, smelling faintly of iron and smoke. My flashlight beam found the chest still gaping where I'd left it. But the rosary inside had moved, lying now across the lid like a warning. Something brushed past my sleeve, cold and deliberate, and the light flickered. That was enough. I bolted down the stairs, locked myself in the study, and sat against the door until the horizon began to pale. When morning came, the house looked ordinary again. Dusty sunlight, quiet, almost gentle. Only the diary on the table proved that the night had happened at all. I pressed record on my phone. "Field log, day 1, I said, voice raw. "Possible psychogenic reactions to isolation, but I'll document everything. If there's a story in this house, I'm going to find it." The journalist had taken over. Fear could wait. By noon, I was digging through the county records at the local library. The clerk, an elderly woman with a crucifix pinned to her cardigan, perked up when I mentioned the Thorne property. "Oh, that place," she said. "It stood empty for years. Some say it's cursed, but that's just old talk. Still, every owner leaves after the first winter. Something about noises, doors opening on their own." I asked if she'd ever heard of Alaric Thorne. She frowned, thought for a long moment, then said quietly, "There was an Alaric spelled different, a witch finder, buried without a marker." She wrote an address on a scrap of paper. "If you really want to chase ghosts, start here." That evening, I followed her directions to the edge of town, where the woods thinned around a derelict chapel. The gravestones were broken, names worn away. I found one with only a carved raven and the faint outline of a cross. When I crouched to photograph it, my phone screen glitched. Lines of static crawled across the image, forming words that shouldn't have been there. Read it all. The battery died instantly. I drove home with the unease of someone being followed by memory itself. Back at the house, the lights flickered once and steadied. The diary waited on the table, open again, though I'd left it shut. A new line bled across the page, the ink still wet. If you have found this, our fates are joined. My breath caught. The air in the kitchen thickened, pressing against my chest until I could barely draw in air. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the weight lifted. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky over Salem cleared to a hard, metallic blue. I should have felt relief, but all I felt was the beginning of a story, and a door I'd just opened that might never close again. I reached for my camera, pointed it at the diary, and whispered to the empty house. "You wanted to be read. Fine. Let's see what you've been waiting to say." The floorboards answered with a single hollow creak. By the third day, the house had stopped feeling like a house. It was beginning to feel like a witness. I spent the morning transcribing the diary, page by page. The handwriting changed subtly as the entries went on. Tighter, more hurried, like someone writing while being watched. The first half read like a field report. The later half trembled with confession. "We ride at dusk toward the village of Whitby," one entry began. "The people whisper of a woman who sings storms into being. Benedict says we must burn the cottage. I see no proof, only fear." Whitby. That was a real place. I checked an atlas to be sure. The coordinates lined up almost exactly with a region I'd visited once for a documentary on maritime superstitions. For the first time, the diary wasn't just old paper. It was geography I could touch. When the sun began to set, I heard footsteps in the corridor upstairs. Slow, deliberate, impossible, because the only living being in the house was me. The sound stopped when I reached the landing. The mirror on the hall wall, cloudy with age, showed my reflection, and behind it, faintly, another figure, darker, as if someone were standing just beyond the glass. I stepped closer. The figure moved closer too, until only the thin silver of the mirror separated us. Then the surface shimmered, like water disturbed by a stone, and cleared. Nothing remained but my own face and the hollow look in my eyes. I backed away, heart hammering. The diary lay open on my desk below, the candle beside it burning with a blue-white core. The wax had begun to pool in a shape that looked disturbingly like a raven. That night I made a decision. If the book wanted to be read, I would read it under conditions I could control. Cameras rolling, recorder on, lights blazing, documentation, my anchor to reason. I set up my tripod in the study, pressed record, and began. September the 14th, 1669, I read. A farmer brought word of bones unearthed near the riverbank. They were not animal. The village insists witches mark the graves with ravens. Benedict ordered me to cleanse the ground. Halfway through the paragraph, the sound in the room changed. Not louder, just denser, as if the air had thickened. The video light flickered, then steadied. The scent of pine and iron returned. I kept reading, my voice shaking but still audible. We found a locket among the bones. Inside, a miniature of a woman. Beneath it, carved into the silver, the words, "Spiritus in tenebris." The same phrase embroidered on the cloth that had wrapped the diary's chest. Something clattered behind me. I turned. One of the old frames had fallen from the wall. The glass hadn't shattered. It had simply lifted itself from its hook and lain gently on the floor. When I picked it up, I saw that the dust behind it had been disturbed, revealing a carving etched into the plaster. A raven in flight, wings outstretched. The cameras were still running. Later, when I played back the footage, the moment before the frame fell showed a blur of motion, a shadow crossing from left to right, moving faster than the lens could track. I told myself it was light interference. I told myself a lot of things. By morning, curiosity had become a kind of fever. I drove into Salem proper and visited the local historical society. The archivist, a man in his 70s with nicotine-stained fingers, pulled an old volume from the stacks when I mentioned Aleric Thorne. "Thorne," he said, tracing the spine. "You sure about that spelling?" I nodded. He flipped through pages until he found a faded court record from 1670. Alaric Thorne, agent of the Crown, charged with heresy after the execution of Master Benedict Crowe. Record incomplete, trial adjourned, accused missing. Missing. The word scratched at me. I photographed the page and thanked him, leaving my card in case he found more. Back at the house, the wind had picked up. The attic door banged softly as I entered. I expected the chest, the dust, the same still air. Instead, the window at the far end stood open, curtains breathing like lungs. On the floor beneath it lay a single feather, black, sleek, and too large to belong to any bird native to this region. I closed the window, pocketed the feather, and sat with the diary once more. There were pages I hadn't reached, pages that felt heavier than the rest. The next entry began differently, almost as if addressed to me. To the one who finds these words, know that the hunt is never done. They will call you as they called me. Do not follow their voice into the dark. The handwriting faltered, ink pooling where the quill had paused. Below the warning, a smear of something brown-red had soaked into the paper, dried centuries ago. My fingertips tingled where they touched it. I looked up. The study window mirrored the candle's flame. For a heartbeat, a shape moved in that reflection. Tall in a long coat, just like the silhouette I'd mistaken for a coat rack my first night here. When I turned, there was nothing. My pulse hammered in my ears. "If you want to be heard," I said to the empty room, "then speak." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was listening. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, small white flakes catching on the window glass. I sat there for a long time watching them until exhaustion dragged me under. When I woke hours later, the diary lay closed and a new slip of paper rested on top. Not parchment, modern stationery, torn from my own notebook. 4 words written in my handwriting, though I hadn't written them. I saw the raven. The message should have terrified me, but instead it ignited something sharp and determined. Whoever or whatever was playing with me wanted a reaction. They would get one. I grabbed my camera and my field kit, the same one I used when documenting crime scenes, and began cataloging everything. Symbols, objects, drafts, sounds. I would build a record too complete to ignore. By midnight, I had mapped every inch of the house, every burned mark, every hidden carving. And yet, standing in the center of the study, surrounded by notes and photographs, I felt no closer to the truth. Then the lights blinked once more. The cameras turned themselves off. In the sudden hush, a single word came from the direction of the attic, calm and unmistakable. "Ellie." The sound of my name dissolved into the rafters, quiet but distinct. I froze, every muscle wired, the camera still warm in my hand. No one else was in the house. I checked the locks twice. "Who's there?" I managed. The answer was wind, or something wearing wind as a disguise. A soft rhythm of footsteps traveled above me, from one end of the attic to the other. I climbed the stairs again, heart pounding in my throat. The attic door stood ajar, the beam of my flashlight slicing through a haze of dust. The chest was open again, though I had locked it. The diary rested on top, its pages turning of their own accord until they stopped near the center. The script was unfamiliar, slanted, hurried. "If she reads, she will awaken us." The words were scrawled across the margin, not part of any dated entry. My skin prickled. I took a photo, then shut the book firmly and brought it downstairs. I placed it inside a metal trunk, locked it, and slid the key into my pocket. Enough for one night. Sleep refused to come. Every time my eyes closed, I saw flashes of another life. A man with ink-stained fingers kneeling beside a fire, a woman's silhouette against a gallows, crows wheeling in a storm-dark sky. At dawn, I gave up. Coffee, notes, more research. The habits of investigation steadied me. If there was a rational explanation, It would hide somewhere in records or science. The town clerk gave me access to parish archives stored in the basement of City Hall. Most of the papers were brittle and half illegible, but one ledger caught my attention. Accounts of the Witchfinders Commission, 1668-1674. Aleric Thorne's name appeared 5 times. The last entry ended mid-sentence. The ink splashed as though the quill had been snatched away. Outside, snow began to fall again, thick, quiet flakes that made the world feel paused. When I returned home that afternoon, fresh footprints led from the gate to my porch. My own, obviously, but there was another set crossing them, narrow, boot-shaped, filled with melted water. I followed them to the threshold where they simply stopped, no prints leading away. Inside, the trunk sat open. The diary waited on the table, a ribbon marking the very page I had locked away. I read because I couldn't not read. December 4th, 1670. Benedict believes the darkness has learned our names. Each time we speak them aloud, something stirs. I begin to wonder if the true witchcraft is not theirs but ours, the summoning born of fear itself. The candle on the table guttered, smoke curling like a question mark. I closed the cover and whispered, "What do you want from me?" A sudden gust slammed the shutters. The sound echoed through the house like a heartbeat. Then almost tenderly, the diary answered. Its pages fluttered open again, and a loose scrap slid free. I caught it before it touched the floor. On one side, a fragment of map, rivers and hills I recognized from the Massachusetts coastline. On the other, a sentence in that same hurried hand. "The door lies where earth meets salt." I looked up, mind racing. Earth meets salt, the shoreline. For the first time since moving in, curiosity outweighed fear. If Alaric had buried something near the coast, I would find it. I packed my camera, gloves, notebook, and flashlight. The diary I wrapped in cloth and slipped into my bag. As I stepped outside, the snow had stopped. The sky had the pale blue clarity that always comes before another storm. Whatever waited by the shore, I would face it. Because if this story had chosen me, I intended to know why. The road to the coast wound through forest and marsh, the kind of landscape that swallowed sound. By late afternoon, the trees thinned, and the smell of salt reached me, a cold, metallic tang that coated the air. The tide was out, revealing a stretch of beach where sand met jagged stone. I parked near the remnants of an old pier. A storm fence sagged in the wind, half buried in drifts of snow. The horizon looked carved from iron. "The door lies where earth meets salt," I murmured, scanning the map fragment again. The lines matched the shape of the shoreline almost perfectly. At its center, a single mark like an X rested beside a sketched raven. I followed the coordinates until the wind rose behind me, pushing against my back as if urging me onward. The sand was stiff with frost. Seaweed crunched under my boots. Near a cluster of stones, something caught the last light of the day, a glint of metal. I knelt. Half hidden beneath the sand was a rusted clasp, attached to what appeared to be the corner of another small box. I dug carefully with my hands until the outline of it emerged, cedar darkened with age. A symbol was carved into the lid, the same interlocking circles I'd seen scorched into the attic rafters. Inside, wrapped in waxed cloth, lay a bundle of papers protected by oilskin. They were fragile but intact. I carried them back to the car before the tide returned. Back at the house, the fire in the hearth burned low, its crackle the only sound. I unwrapped the bundle. Inside were letters, not in Alaric's hand, but in another, more delicate script. Each was addressed to him. Each was signed with a single name, Isolde. The letters told a different story from the one in the diary. Isolde spoke of healing herbs, of helping villagers, of being hunted for her knowledge. Her tone was calm at first, then frantic. "They have turned your name into a weapon," one letter read. "They say you hunt for righteousness, yet you serve men who do not know it." My pulse quickened. The diary and the letters weren't just relics. They contradicted each other, one man's testimony against another's truth. As I read, a faint hum began again in the walls, a vibration that seemed to sync with the rhythm of my breathing. I looked up. The diary closed on the table had shifted a fraction of an inch closer to me. I set down the letter and opened it. The new page contained no date, only a single line. Her words will reach you. Do not let them turn you. The handwriting was Alaric's. I stood, pacing, adrenaline rushing through my veins. This wasn't coincidence anymore. It was correspondence, stretched across centuries. I turned on every light in the house, trying to banish the shadows pooling in the corners. Then I pressed record on my phone again. "This is Eleanor Hartley," I said, voice unsteady. "If something happens, if I disappear, this diary, the box, the letters, they're evidence. Someone will need to see them." A gust swept down the chimney, scattering ash across the floor. In the shifting embers, shapes appeared, half-formed wings, a suggestion of eyes. I blinked, and they were gone. The clock struck midnight. I hadn't realized how long I'd been reading. In the silence that followed, another sound crept in. A whisper, not from above this time, but from the pages themselves, soft as breath, threaded through the crackle of the dying fire. "Finish what he began." The words rippled through the room, gone as quickly as they came. I closed the diary gently, as though touching something alive, and whispered back into the quiet house, "I will." Outside, the wind rose again, carrying with it the sound of distant wings. The house waited for me to sleep. It didn't get what it wanted. I sat by the window through the early hours, the diary shut in front of me, the letters from Isolde spread across the desk. Outside, the snow had stopped. The world looked paused, like a photograph that had forgotten to keep breathing. At 3 in the morning, the grandfather clock in the hall began to tick, though it hadn't since I'd moved in. The sound wasn't steady. It faltered as if catching its breath, and each uneven beat seemed to pulse through the floorboards. I rose and followed it. The pendulum swung, slow and deliberate, and behind it I saw the edge of something that didn't belong, a scrap of parchment wedged between the inner gears. I opened the glass door and eased it free. The same hand that filled the diary had written across it in brown-black ink, "When the raven flies east, the circle closes." The message made no sense, yet I felt the meaning anyway, a warning disguised as a riddle. I returned to the desk, laid the scrap beside the letters, and began to assemble everything into a timeline. Alaric's entries, Isolde's pleas, the parish records. Together they formed the outline of a story still unfinished. Just before dawn, exhaustion blurred my thoughts. I must have nodded off because when I woke, the candle had burned to the end, and someone or something had moved my work. The letters now lay in a perfect ring around the diary. The scrap from the clock sat in the middle, a circle. Wind howled through the chimney. The flame of the last candle stretched, flickered, and went out. In the sudden dim light, I saw the faintest shimmer on the wall above the desk. An outline, chalk white against the wood, the shape of a door, not drawn, projected somehow as if by memory. My breath caught. I reached out. The surface was solid, but colder than the rest of the room. For an instant, I felt something behind it. Pressure, awareness, waiting. Then the vision vanished. The wall was just wall again. The clock struck once, soft as a heartbeat. Morning light crept through the window. The ordinary noises of the world returned. Wind, the creak of settling wood, my own uneven breathing. The haunting quiet had lifted, leaving only the residue of what I'd seen. I closed the diary, wrapped it in cloth, and locked it in the trunk. My hands shook as I turned the key. I didn't know whether the house had shown me the past or whether my own mind had conjured it, but I knew one thing beyond doubt. This story was alive, and it wanted to be told. Standing in the open doorway, watching the sun rise over the snow-white fields, I felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. The journalist in me recognized it, the pull of a mystery too deep to walk away from. Somewhere between earth and salt, in the space where reason frays, Aleric Thorne's truth waited. And I was already part of it. I took one last look back at the house on Hawthorne Hill. The upper window reflected the morning light, or maybe something standing just beyond it. I couldn't tell. Then I whispered to no one in particular, "All right, I'll read the rest." Behind me, the door swung closed with a sound like a final period at the end of a sentence. Part Miu on Alaric's awakening. The diary smelled of smoke when I opened it again. Not old paper or mildew, smoke, faint but unmistakable, as if the words themselves remembered fire. The first dated page after my sleepless night began. Northumberland, February 1668. The frost has turned the earth to stone. I buried the last of my books this morning, the ones the villagers said carried blight. I no longer know what they mean by blight. The script belonged to Aleric Thorne, the man who once hunted witches and now seemed to be writing from the edge of his own doubt. His world unfolded in black ink, moorland shrouded in fog, cottages crouched under thatch, fear spreading faster than plague. Reading it felt like stepping through a doorway cut in time. He wrote of a man named Benedict Crow, mentor and magistrate both. Crow carried the authority of the king and the conviction of a prophet. Under his banner, Alaric had become an investigator, interrogator, and, by his own reluctant admission, a weapon. He says we are shepherds guarding the flock, but shepherds sometimes learn to love the knife. I copied the line into my notebook. Even 4 centuries later, it had the ring of warning. The scene shifted. The miller's wife lies dead by the river. The villagers whisper of a storm called by hand. Crow commands that we ride. Alaric's description of the ride to Whitby read like a soldier's dispatch. The crunch of hooves on frozen mud. The burn of wind against skin. The mix of devotion and dread. The accused woman, Mara Fenn, mid-30s, healer, mother of 2, waited in her cottage with the calm of someone who had already accepted her fate. Crow asked if she had seen the devil. She answered, only in the eyes of frightened men. For this he called her unrepentant. I could picture it clearly. The flicker of torches, the white breath of horses, Crow's shadow swallowing the smaller ones. The entry ended abruptly. At dawn the fire took her, I turned away. Then written smaller beneath it, I dreamed that she sang while burning. I closed the book, breathing shallowly. The candle flame wavered as if reacting to the memory. Through the window, dawn over Salem was the same color Alaric had described. Ashen gold. I needed distance. I made coffee, checked my cameras, reviewed last night's recordings. Nothing unusual, just me, reading. No whispers, no shadows. Yet the audio track held a faint hum between sentences, a low note almost like chanting. When I ran the file backward, the hum shaped 3 syllables. Alaric. The room tilted slightly. I shut the laptop. Enough for now. The next pages of the diary were less a confession than an investigation. Alaric wrote of symbols carved into doors, of powders mixed from roots and salt, of villagers whose illnesses followed patterns no physician could explain. He drew sketches, interlocking circles, ravens perched on crosses, geometric patterns meant to ward or summon. The same mark appears wherever fear takes root, he wrote. Perhaps fear itself is the contagion. Between the lines, I caught the tone of a man struggling to stay rational in a world tipping toward hysteria. He cataloged every superstition as if evidence could save him from believing it. Then came a note that changed everything. A messenger arrived from York. They speak of a secret fellowship guiding our work from behind the throne. They call themselves the Covenant of Ravens. Crow swears allegiance. I do not. The phrase jolted me. The raven again. The same emblem that haunted the house. The gravestone. The feather in my pocket. And now it had a name. The Covenant of Ravens. I traced the words with a fingertip. The page felt warmer than it should. A pulse seemed to move under the leather binding, faint but there. I pulled my hand away. Somewhere upstairs, a floorboard answered with a slow creak. Alaric's next entries painted the slow erosion of faith. He described nights spent questioning suspects, the way guilt spread through a village like fog. Touch one and it clung to all. He wrote of Benedict Crow's sermons, how they stirred crowds into frenzy. He wrote of Isolde, a woman who refused to flee though her name had appeared on a list of the condemned. She spoke of light that hides within darkness. She said the raven does not choose sides, it only watches. Crow called her blasphemer. I called her brave. The handwriting grew jagged after that, as if written during flight. They will burn her at the solstice. I have sworn to find proof before that night, or else join her in the flames. The entry ended there. I set the diary aside and stared at the quiet house around me. My reflection in the window looked paler than usual, eyes ringed with sleepless circles. I had the sensation of being watched, not by something hostile, but by someone waiting for me to understand. I opened my research folder, Whitby, Northumberland, 1668. I searched old trial lists, cross-checked dates. There had been a series of executions that year, records incomplete. Among the witnesses listed, Magistrate Benedict Crowe. Among the accused, Mara Fenn. Among the investigators, Aleric Thorne. The connection was no longer abstract. The diary wasn't just memory, it was evidence. I drove into Salem that afternoon to meet Professor Haynes, a historian who'd once advised on a documentary I produced. His office smelled of dust and coffee. When I showed him photographs of the diary, his brows lifted. Authentic 17th century script, he said. And if these names are accurate, you're holding a primary source from the early Witchfinder commissions. That's extraordinary. Or dangerous, I said. He smiled. Knowledge usually is. He leaned closer, studying the emblem stamped on the cover. Ravens, interlocking circles. I've seen similar marks in northern archives. Some called them protective sigils, others seals of allegiance. You may have stumbled onto something much larger than a single man's diary. When I left his office, the sky was turning copper. Snow began to fall again, thin and silent. I should have felt triumph. Instead, I felt the weight of a door opening somewhere behind me. Back at Hawthorne Hill, I placed the diary on the desk and pressed record once more. This is Eleanor Hartley, I said quietly. Day 5. Alaric's story is converging with documented history. I don't know what the Covenant of Ravens was, but I intend to find out. The clock ticked twice, then stopped. And from the chimney came the faint sound of wings. The diary's next pages drew me entirely into Alaric's world. The entries shifted from reflection to testimony, each one a report from the field. York, March 1668. We have come upon a pattern of symbols etched into doorways of the dead. Always the raven, always facing east. Crowe insists it marks allegiance to sorcery. I suspect it is meant to ward against him. He described villages gripped by fear, livestock dying, children sick, crops blackened, and every loss pinned to the nearest outcast. He listed names: the weaver, the fisherman's widow, the priest's apprentice, men and women he questioned, many he cleared, some he couldn't save. I begin to think the real curse is ignorance given authority. That sentence lodged in my chest. It was the voice of someone trying to hold reason while the world demanded faith. Yes, I needed air. Outside the window, Hawthorne Hill looked harmless. Snow blanketing the roof, pines bending in the wind. Yet I couldn't shake the sense that the ground beneath that snow hid echoes of what Alaric had once done. I bundled up and walked to the edge of the property where the forest met the frozen creek. Beneath a crust of ice, the water still moved, whispering. I thought about the phrase he'd written again and again. The raven faces east. East was the direction of the rising sun and of the coastline. Maybe he had left something there. The rational part of me laughed at the thought, but my feet were already turning back toward the car. Alaric, York, 1669. The covenant meets in shadow. Crowe has pledged them the souls of every witch they condemn. He says their ashes strengthen the kingdom. I have seen the opposite. Villages hollowed by grief, faith turned to madness. Tonight I ride north alone. The diary switched from prose to fragments, notes written between flights from authority. Alaric described a coded ledger he stole from the Covenant's courier, a list of names and locations connected by a single emblem. The raven enclosed in a circle. One name appeared again and again in the margin, Isolde Marin. She is said to walk between worlds. If she exists, she may be the key to ending this. When I looked up from the page, the fire in the hearth had burned low. A sudden knock rattled the door. 3 sharp raps. My heart lurched. The clock read 2 a.m. I hesitated, then opened it. No one. Only snow swirling under the porch light, but on the welcome mat lay a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. My name was written across the top in looping ink. Inside, a book, Modern, The Witchfinders of Northern England, by Dr. Haynes. A sticky note clung to the cover. Thought you'd want a copy. H. I exhaled shakily, half laughing at my own fear. Still, the timing made my pulse race. Flipping through, I found a chapter near the back titled, The Disappearance of Aleric Thorne. It summarized everything the diary had hinted at. A witch-finder who turned against his masters and vanished after betraying the Covenant of Ravens. Local rumor claimed he'd hidden documents exposing them. None had ever been found. The next day I returned to Haynes's office. You didn't need to deliver this in person, I said. He blinked. Deliver? I mailed it. Yesterday afternoon. I showed him the parcel wrapping. He frowned. That isn't my handwriting. He studied the looping script, brow furrowing. It looks 17th century. The words slid through me like ice. If Haynes hadn't brought the book, then someone or something had. That night the diary opened to a section I didn't remember seeing before. The ink was darker, fresher. Northumberland, July 1669. I have found her. Isolde is no witch, but a scholar of herbs and star charts. She says the covenant serves a single purpose, to keep knowledge chained. She showed me the truth hidden beneath the raven's wings. The symbol is not of darkness, but of record. The raven remembers. We burn what we fear, and fear what we refuse to learn. A sketch followed, a diagram of interlocking circles representing elements. Earth, air, fire, water, spirit. At the center, a single eye. When the five align, the veil weakens. The writing stopped there, but below the drawing, a thumbprint stained the page. I pressed my own thumb beside it. The paper was cold, but a faint vibration pulsed beneath the surface. A memory flared, of the chalk-white door I'd seen projected on the wall. 5 circles around a center. The same geometry. The rational part of me reached for my camera, documenting everything. The part that had begun to believe whispered that the door wasn't a vision. It was a map. Alaric, December 1669. They found us near the ruins at Hadrian's Wall. Crows riders. Isolde bade me run. I did not. Steel clashed, torches fell, and the snow turned to steam. When the smoke cleared, she was gone. I do not know whether she escaped or was taken. I have the ledger still. I will hide it where salt meets earth, beyond the reach of kings. My hands trembled. The coastline again. The same phrase I'd found on the scrap hidden in the clock. Whatever Alaric had buried was real, and it was still waiting. I drove to the shore the next morning, the same stretch where I'd unearthed Isolde's letters. Wind tore at my coat, waves gnawed at the sand. I paced along the waterline until I found a rock outcropping shaped like a broken wing. Beneath it, the ground felt hollow. I dug with my gloved hands until fingers struck wood. Another box, smaller than the first, sealed with iron nails. Inside, wrapped in linen, lay a roll of parchment bound with wax. The seal bore the raven emblem, but beneath it a single letter was scratched by hand. E for Eleanor, or perhaps for End. The parchment contained a map, England's northern coast drawn in Alaric's own lines, and a list of symbols beside each marked village. The final symbol was unfamiliar, a circle split by a vertical line, half light, half dark. Beneath it he had written, "The circle breaks where reason stands." The air around me shimmered faintly, a mirage in winter cold. Then the shimmer was gone. I replaced the box, heart hammering, and hurried back to the car. That night, as I typed my notes, I realized something simple and terrifying. Alaric's path from Northumberland to York to the coast matched the coordinates of the carvings in my own attic beams. Someone, or something, had recreated his map in this house centuries later. I closed my laptop and looked at the diary lying open beside it. The candle's flame bent toward the pages as if drawn by breath. "We are never finished," the ink seemed to say. I whispered into the quiet, "Neither am I." The light went out. The dark swallowed the room for only a heartbeat before the emergency lamp on my desk flickered on. Its thin blue light threw long shadows across the walls, and for the first time I noticed that the soot stains around the fireplace weren't random. They formed a pattern, the same split circle symbol that marked the final village on Alaric's map. I traced it with my fingertips. The soot crumbled away to reveal carved grooves beneath, shallow but deliberate. Whoever had built this house had known that sign. Alaric's words echoed in my mind. The circle breaks where reason stands. Reason, evidence, proof. I was done pretending this was just a story. I retrieved the diary, my camera, and the small ultraviolet scanner I used in investigations. Under the UV beam, hidden ink blossomed across the last page, new lines invisible in normal light. If you follow me, beware the hollow men. They bear no faith, only hunger. Trust the raven, it remembers the path. The phrase hollow men unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. I turned off the scanner, locked the diary away again, and tried to sleep on the couch. Around 3 a.m., a knocking woke me. Not on the door, but from inside the walls. A rhythmic thud, like the heartbeat of the house itself. Then silence. Alaric, early 1670. They have taken Crow's sermons to every village. Fear has become the only language. I ride alone now, a heretic among hunters. Yet the raven follows. Black feathers at every crossroads. Perhaps a sign, perhaps a warning. He wrote of a new mission assigned by the Covenant, to hunt a witch in the moors of Hargate. The woman was said to command the weather, to drown ships from her window. The description mirrored the earlier accusations against Marafen, patterns repeating. If I obey, I condemn another innocent. If I refuse, I become the accused. Alaric chose a third path. He would reach Hargate first and investigate quietly, seeking truth before the Covenant's riders arrived. His narrative sharpened, turning almost procedural. Observation, 3 farms abandoned. Evidence, strange lights near the marsh. Witness, one fisherman who swore he'd seen a woman wading through mist, carrying a lantern that burned blue. Alaric recorded every detail like a detective building a case. In the margins, he scrawled coordinates, astronomical notes, sketches of constellations reflected in water. It wasn't witchcraft, it was navigation. Someone had been signaling ships, not sinking them. The witch they fear is only a sailor's widow guiding her husband home. I felt a rush of admiration for him. This man, 4 centuries dead, who had tried to replace superstition with sense. The next page broke the calm. Crow arrived before dawn with 6 men. They found my notes and burned them. They found her and took her. I could not stop them. I am done. The entry ended in a smear of ink that looked like a fingerprint dragged downward. I rubbed my eyes, trying to focus. The diary was pulling me into a place where time folded, where my reactions echoed his. I closed it, intending to step outside, but the front door wouldn't move. The lock turned freely. The wood itself refused to yield as though swollen shut. Then from upstairs, a faint tapping, 5 knocks, a pause, then 5 again. Morse code. I knew the pattern. SOS. I ran up the staircase. The attic door hung half open. Inside, cold air swirled. My cameras, the ones I'd left aimed at the chest, were off. Batteries drained. In the center of the floor lay a single black feather. Beside it, carved into the dust, the same coordinates Alaric had noted in his diary. Hargate Marsh, 1670. It was impossible. Different continent, different century. But the numbers were real. I copied them down. When I looked again, the feather was gone. The next day, I drove to the university to use Haynes's archive maps. Hargate Marsh had been drained and renamed centuries ago, now part of the British Coastal Reserve. But the coordinates aligned with a sister site on the Massachusetts shoreline, a colonial settlement briefly called New Hargate, founded by emigrants from York in 1672. The pattern was repeating again. Eleanor, Haynes said when I showed him, if Thorne or his followers fled England, they might have built your house. The design, the symbols, it fits the Puritan migration period. You could be living in their replica of safety. Replica, or continuation. He offered to visit Hawthorne Hill to examine the carvings. I hesitated, then agreed. Maybe another pair of eyes would break the spell of obsession. That evening, the storm returned, thunder rolling low across the bay. I waited for Haynes, but when the clock struck 9, headlights never appeared on the road. My phone lost signal. Only the wind arrived, rattling the shutters. I lit a lantern and turned toward the study. The diary lay where I'd left it, but a new sheet of paper rested on top. Modern, lined, torn from Haynes's notebook. His handwriting shaky. Don't trust the reflection. Lightning flashed. In the window above the desk, my reflection smiled a second before I did. I stepped back, pulse hammering. The glass went dark again, showing only my pale face and the lantern's glow. The house exhaled, a long, low groan that seemed to come from its foundation. Then the lights returned, humming back to life, ordinary again. My reflection matched me once more. I tried to laugh it off, but the sound stuck in my throat. Alaric, late 1670. Crow is dead. His own men turned on him after the storm. I fled with the ledger and the knowledge he sought to bury. The covenant will rise again. They always do. But truth leaves seeds. If any find this, remember, the raven is not the enemy. It is the witness. The entry was the last complete one. After it, the handwriting deteriorated into fragments, half sentences, drawings of eyes and circles, coordinates scrawled in margins. The final line read, "The circle is never broken." I closed the diary slowly. The phrase pulsed through my thoughts like a heartbeat. Outside, the storm raged. Somewhere beyond the pines, a single raven called once. Then again, the sound rolled through the wind and faded into the distance, leaving the house silent but listening. I turned to the camera, forcing steadiness into my voice. This is Eleanor Hartley, day 7. The diary is nearly finished, but the pattern isn't. The coordinates lead here, to this coastline. Whatever Alaric buried, the covenant, or what remains of it, may still be guarding. Thunder answered. I ended the recording, packed my bag with the diary, the map, and my field kit, and wrote one note for anyone who might find the footage. If I don't return, the truth is beneath the marsh. As I stepped outside, the wind died abruptly, as if the storm itself was holding its breath. The raven cried once more from the trees, then took flight toward the east. I followed. The raven led me through a tunnel of trees that clawed at the headlights. The storm had scattered branches across the road. Each one looked like a hand reaching from the dark. I followed the coastline until the GPS map on my dash dissolved into static. Past the last row of pines, the marsh opened, a broad field of reeds silvered by rain. In the distance, lightning lit the remnants of an old jetty, nothing more than timbers jutting out of black water. I parked and stepped into the wind. Mud sucked at my boots and salt stung my face. Somewhere beyond the reeds came the cry of that same bird again. 3 notes, clear and deliberate. I switched on my flashlight and started walking. Each flash of lightning showed the land in brief, perfect stillness. The curve of the bay, the drowned fence posts, the ghostly gleam of ice across the tide flats. I half expected to see someone standing out there waiting. Instead, only the reeds moved. Yet they moved against the wind. I pressed on until I reached the base of the jetty. The boards were slick, half-rotted. Beneath them, the water pulsed with reflected fire from the sky. I aimed my light downward and caught the glint of metal wedged between 2 stones, a clasp centuries old, and the edge of another container. Kneeling, I pried it free. It was the size of a small journal, wrapped in oilcloth hardened by time. The seal was identical to the others, a raven encircled by 5 rings. Inside lay parchment pages covered in Alaric's hand, written in a faint reddish ink. To the one who walks after me, know that reason is not a shield. When faith and fear join hands, truth burns between them. Guard the record, not the relic. The final page was torn. The last word ended mid-sentence. Something moved in the water behind me, a ripple, then another. I turned the beam that way. Nothing but reeds. Still, the feeling of being watched clung to me all the way back to the car. At Hawthorne Hill, the air felt heavier, charged. I left the newly found journal on the table beside the older one, set up 2 cameras, and hit record. Field log, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Recovered second document. Confirmed Aleric Thorne's final hide site at New Hargate Marsh. Text suggests more than one author. Ink differs, possibly as old Marin. The candles flickered as if a breath had passed through the room. The pages of both diaries fluttered open, settling on mirrored lines. Alaric. The raven watches the threshold. Isolde. The raven opens the threshold. The difference of one word changed everything. Watch or open, guardian or key. The house groaned again. From somewhere deep in the walls came a faint ticking, like many clocks out of sync. I crossed the room toward the sound. It led me to the base of the staircase, where plaster had cracked in a rough oval. The crack followed the same outline as the door of light I'd seen that first night. I ran my fingers along it. The plaster gave way easily, revealing wood beneath, boards that had once been part of a door and had later been sealed over. A hinge glimmered in the lantern light. Every instinct told me to stop. I didn't. I pried until a sliver of space opened and cold air rolled out, smelling of earth and salt. The secret door swung inward onto darkness. Steps descended into stone. The passageway was narrow and damp, built of rough granite. I filmed as I went, counting 20 steps before reaching the bottom. The tunnel widened into a low chamber where the ceiling dripped steadily. At its center stood a wooden table collapsed under its own decay, and on it lay a bundle wrapped in black cloth. The cloth bore the raven emblem drawn in white chalk. I lifted a corner. Inside was a small mirror framed in tarnished silver. My reflection wavered in it like something underwater. I raised the lantern. The image in the glass brightened, too bright, and then I saw another figure standing behind my reflection. A man in a long coat, eyes like candlelight. The lantern sputtered. Darkness reclaimed the room. When the flames steadied again, the mirror showed only me. But a voice drifted through the tunnel, quiet, certain. Guard the record, not the relic. Alaric, or the echo of him. I backed up the stairs, carrying the mirror wrapped tight. As soon as I crossed the threshold into the house, the hidden door slammed itself shut with a boom that shook dust from the beams. The latch vanished into smooth plaster as if it had never existed. I spent the next hours rewatching the footage. The camera had caught everything up until the moment the mirror flared white. After that, blank frames, static. The audio, though, recorded a faint heartbeat overlaying my own, and one whispered phrase, awakened. When morning came, the house felt strangely quiet, emptied of pressure. I opened both diaries side by side. Alaric's last legible sentence repeated itself in my head. Guard the record, not the relic. The relic, the mirror, was still wrapped on the floor beside me. I didn't touch it. Instead, I typed my report, each word anchoring me back to reality. Yet when I reached the line describing the man in the reflection, the keys froze beneath my fingers. The mirror across the room had begun to hum, a thin metallic vibration, barely audible, but felt through the soles of my feet. I turned slowly. Light leaked from the edges of the cloth like dawn through fog. Before I could move, a single line appeared across the open diary page in new, wet ink. The threshold remembers you. The humming stopped. The cloth settled. Outside, the first rays of sunrise cut through the mist, washing the room in silver. I whispered to the quiet house, "Then remember this, I'm not done yet." That sunrise marked the end of my first week in Salem, and the moment I understood that Alaric's story hadn't ended in 1670. It had simply changed narrators. I packed both journals, the sealed mirror, and my notes into the trunk. Part of me wanted to leave them with the university, let history handle its ghosts. The other part knew that if I stopped now, the mystery would never stop following me. There were still names on Alaric's map, still unanswered coordinates. I closed the trunk and slid the key into my pocket. The raven outside the window cawed once, tilting its head as if waiting for my decision. "I'll keep going, I'm Tushan," I told it, "but on my terms." It flapped once and vanished into the light. Part 3, The Covenant of Ravens. The air in Hawthorne Hill had changed after that night. It no longer felt hostile, just watchful, as if the house were waiting for me to continue a story it already knew the ending of. I cleared the table, set the camera to record, and began reading the next sequence of entries that had appeared in faint ink along the edges of Alaric's journal. They were undated, but the tone was different, urgent, decisive, written by a man already in hiding. They call themselves the Covenant of Ravens, he wrote, a brotherhood beneath the king's banners, sworn to protect the realm from witchcraft. But their true allegiance is to silence. They burn the wise and keep the ashes for their own designs. A sketch followed. 7 figures around a stone altar, ravens carved into their masks, a circle of fire between them. Beneath the drawing he had scrawled, York, Winter, 1670. I read those words aloud, letting the microphone pick up every tremor in my voice. Then I stopped, because something in the house was echoing me. Each time I said covenant, the sound came back a heartbeat later from the walls, a whisper, lower, like an answer. I told myself it was the acoustics. Still, I lowered my tone. The next entry read like a police report disguised as confession. We intercepted a courier carrying correspondence between the Covenant and the royal court. Crow's name still commands fear, but they speak now of a successor, a man who signs only with the image of a broken ring. I fear their reach extends beyond England. The colonies in the New World welcome our exiles. Perhaps our enemies go with them. I froze. The New World, Massachusetts, Salem. Alaric's prediction had crossed an ocean and landed beneath my feet. The wind outside moaned through the chimney like a distant horn. I poured another coffee, fighting the pull of exhaustion. If the Covenant had survived, their legacy might still exist somewhere in the foundations of this town, disguised as history. The journalist in me surfaced again. I opened my laptop and started building a file. Covenant, structure, symbolism, migration, 1670, 1700. Patterns, names, dates. Each thread I pulled from the diary found a mirror in early colonial architecture. Houses built around secret rooms, hidden passages, mirrored attics like mine. The data felt almost criminal to assemble. I was tracing ghosts the way detectives trace suspects. I turned back to the diary. Alaric's next entry began with blood in its tone, though not in its words. They sent men to my door at Whitby. I was not there. I saw them from the trees, torches moving like stars fallen to earth. They questioned my neighbors, then set the house alight. The raven circled above them 3 times and flew east. I follow it. The following pages became fragments. A journey by night, a code written in Latin, an oath sworn not to serve but to witness. He described the Covenant's northern stronghold, a castle in ruin, yet still guarded by soldiers who no longer remembered whom they served. They call it the House of Ashes. Beneath its stones lies what they guard, the circle itself carved into bedrock. I felt the hairs on my arms lift. The circle. I knew that phrase from the carved door under my stairs and from the soot marks in the hearth. The same geometry, the same obsession. I stood and walked to the fireplace. The morning light had not yet broken, and the embers glowed faintly. I brushed ash away until my fingers touched the carved outline of that circle again. 5 rings, 1 broken. The split felt deliberate, a wound in the pattern. Behind it, something hollow answered, a vibration, low and steady, as if the stones themselves remembered the same tune Alaric had once heard. I left the house at first light and drove to Boston to consult the maritime archives. There, among ledgers and passenger lists from the late 1600s, I found the proof that changed everything. Aleric Thorne, ship manifest, 1671, destination, New Hargate Colony, Massachusetts Bay. He had crossed the ocean after all. The archivist, an older woman with sharp eyes, leaned over the document. Most of these settlers disappeared within a decade, she said. The colony collapsed. Flooding, they claimed, though the records are odd. Many pages removed. removed or erased, the covenant again. That night I returned to Hawthorne Hill. The road was a silver ribbon under the moon. When I opened the door, the house smelled faintly of rain and old smoke, like the deck of a ship. On the table lay a new scrap of parchment that hadn't been there when I left. A single sentence written in Alaric's hand. The circle has crossed the sea. Till I turned the cameras back on, adrenaline burning away fatigue. Field log, day 8, I said. Confirmation. Alaric reached the colonies. The Covenant symbol exists in early Massachusetts. I believe they built a network of houses, possibly including this one, linked by ritual geometry. The question is whether anyone kept it alive. Outside, thunder rolled far off over the bay. I flipped through the diary again. The next page was a map of the New World. Coastlines half drawn, a raven's wing inked across the northern territories. Beneath it, where the wing touches the sea, the circle begins anew. At the edge of the map, a name was written in darker ink. Salem. The rest of the night blurred into research. I compared Alaric's sketches with aerial maps. The alignment of old settlements formed a pattern of 5 points surrounding Salem, each separated by roughly 20 miles, the same geometry as the carved circle. My house sat at the center. If the Covenant had used geography the way they use symbols, then Hawthorne Hill wasn't just a refuge, it was a keystone. A loud crack snapped me from my trance. The mirror I had wrapped in cloth had fallen from the shelf. The fabric had come loose, and for a second I saw movement in the glass. A raven's wing folding over a burning city. Then it was gone. When I called Professor Haynes, leaving a message. Your theory was right. The architecture, the migration, it's all connected. But I think they built something bigger than churches or houses. They built a network for belief itself. When I hung up, the house felt alive again. The sound of the sea reached me, though I was miles inland, a constant hush like breath through stone. On the table, the diaries lay open side by side. The ink on both shimmered faintly, letters forming slowly as if written by invisible hands. Alaric. They gather on the solstice. Isolde. They will burn the truth to keep their lie warm. I whispered, then we'll see who freezes first. I packed my gear, slung the camera over my shoulder, and drove toward the coordinates forming the western point of Alaric's circle. Ravensgate, a derelict farmhouse outside Ipswich that I'd marked earlier. The road there was narrow, hemmed by birches. Snow flurries blurred the headlights. When I reached the gate, rusted hinges shrieked. The house beyond was a skeleton of timber and stone, its roof long collapsed. Still, symbols stained the doorway. 5 rings, the broken one mended in fresh chalk. Someone had been here recently. Inside, dust muffled my footsteps. A circle of candles, new, still warm, ringed the center of the floor. On the wall hung a mirror twin to mine. The air hummed with the same low vibration I'd heard beneath my hearth. From outside came the crunch of tires on gravel. Headlights flashed across the broken windows. I ducked behind a beam as a car door slammed. Voices, 2 men, 1 woman, talking in calm, precise tones. Another site, one said. The resonance is stable. The Keystone House will open soon. They weren't ghosts. They were alive. The Covenant still existed. I recorded everything on my phone, crouched in shadow. The trio began arranging instruments, handheld sensors, and a tripod-mounted lens that glowed faintly blue. One of them produced a small black book embossed with the raven symbol. The words of Thorne, the woman said reverently. He was the first to see the pattern. We only continue his work, Alaric's work, twisted, repurposed. They began to chant, a rhythmic murmuring that matched the low hum in the air. The floor vibrated. The symbols on the walls pulsed faintly. I backed toward the door, careful not to disturb anything. My boot struck a fallen beam. It rolled, clattering. 3 heads snapped toward the sound. Who's there? I ran. Snow blinded me as I sprinted for the car. The engine roared to life on the second try. In the rearview mirror, figures spilled from the farmhouse, flashlights cutting through the dark. I tore down the lane towards Salem, the tires spraying gravel. Behind me, a blue glow erupted from the ruin, like lightning trapped inside the building. When I reached Hawthorne Hill, the air around the house vibrated with the same frequency I'd felt in the marsh and the farmhouse combined. The diaries on the table fluttered madly, pages turning as if caught in a storm of their own making. I shouted over the noise, "Alaric, whatever you started, it's happening again." The house shuddered once and went still. In the silence that followed, the ink on the open page bled into new words. "Then finish it, Eleanor." I don't know how long I stood there before I realized what the message meant. The Covenant wanted to open the circle. Alaric had meant to close it. The keystone was the house, my house, and I was standing in the center. I grabbed the diaries, the mirror, every scrap of evidence, and carried them to the hearth. The carved circle still glowed faintly under the soot. My plan was half mad but clear. Complete the pattern the way Alaric had designed, not the way they intended. Seal it. Using chalk and salt from the kitchen, I redrew the rings on the floor, aligning them with the compass points marked on Alaric's map. Wind howled through unseen cracks. The mirror began to hum, light spilling from beneath the cloth. Outside engines approached, the Covenant's car, headlights cutting through the storm. I finished the final ring and spoke the only words I remembered from Alaric's diary. Raven witness, circle, close. The hum turned to a roar. The floor beneath me vibrated like a drum. Every candle in the room flared white, then went out. Darkness folded over everything. When I woke, dawn bled through shattered windows. The snow had stopped. The house was silent except for the drip of melting ice. The carvings on the floor had vanished, burned into the wood as perfect rings. The diaries lay closed beside me, their covers cool, their pages blank once more. Outside, the road was empty. No tire tracks, no sign of the intruders. Only a single black feather rested on the porch. I picked it up and whispered, "Witness." The wind carried the word away toward the sea. When that was how I ended the report for the Bureau Archive and how I began the next stage of the investigation, the one that would lead into the story of Isolde Marin and the final revelation about the Covenant's purpose. But that is for another entry. Part 4, The Trial of Faith. The day after the circle closed, Hawthorne Hill felt emptied of sound. No whisper in the walls, no flicker of unseen wings, only quiet and the weight of something unfinished. I documented everything for the record. Photographs of the scorched rings on the floor, the feather on the porch, the diaries now blank. Every logical part of me wanted to treat it as aftermath. Some electromagnetic event, a localized power surge. But beneath that logic pulsed the memory of the humming and the light that had folded itself around me. Whatever had happened was not over. It was waiting for interpretation. I replayed the final recording from the night before. The footage showed the candles flaring and my own voice shouting, "Circle, close." Then static. But buried in that static was another voice, a man's murmuring a single phrase. When slowed and filtered, it became clear. She will face the trial. The trial. Alaric's words again, echoing across centuries. At noon, I left for Boston to meet Professor Haynes. He had ignored my calls all morning, and the silence itself felt ominous. His office door was unlocked. Inside, papers lay scattered, books overturned, the air faintly metallic. On his desk, written in chalk, was the same split circle emblem. No sign of Haynes. I called the police, filed the report, answered their polite skepticism. Before leaving, I noticed one more detail. His window was open, though it was freezing outside, and a single black feather rested on the sill. The Covenant had reached him. Back at the house, I searched Alaric's diary again, even though the pages looked blank. Under ultraviolet light, faint handwriting glowed along the margins, new ink, modern in composition. Truth is tried by fire. Follow the path to judgment. The coordinates beneath pointed not to Salem but west, toward the Berkshires, near the ruins of an old meeting hall listed in colonial records as Ravenscourt. If there was a trial, it would be held there. I prepared like an investigator, not a believer. Cameras, voice recorders, spare batteries, maps, first aid kit. But when I locked the house and turned toward the car, I saw footprints leading away from the porch. Bare, human, pressed deep into the snow. They stopped halfway down the drive, vanishing as if the person had simply dissolved into the air. I followed anyway. The road narrowed into forest. Dusk fell early, the sun bleeding red through pines. By the time I reached Ravenscourt, the world was dark except for the pulse of my flashlight. The building was little more than a stone foundation and 4 surviving columns. Snow drifted through the gaps where the roof had once been. Yet candles burned inside, 12 of them, arranged in a circle around a raised platform. A notebook lay open on the stone, Haynes's handwriting. Trial tonight. The witness has been chosen. As I read, a shape moved at the edge of the light. I turned. 7 figures stood among the columns, cloaked, faces hidden behind masks carved with ravens. Their leader stepped forward, the same woman I had seen at the farmhouse. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "You closed the circle, Eleanor. That was only the beginning." I gripped my flashlight like a weapon. "Where's Haynes?" "He has taken his place." "As you will." She gestured toward the platform. On it lay the silver mirror, uncovered now, its surface rippling with light. The reflection inside wasn't mine. It showed Aleric Thorne, kneeling before a tribunal of men in 17th century robes. The woman spoke again. "Every hunter must be judged by their own hunt. Step forward and see what you have inherited." I should have run. Instead, I moved closer, drawn by the impossible. The air around the mirror shimmered, heat without fire. When my reflection touched its surface, the world inverted, light folding into darkness, sound collapsing into silence. Suddenly, I was standing in another place, the same hall, whole and bright with torchlight. Men filled the benches, their faces solemn. Alaric knelt at the center, chains at his wrists. Above them hung a banner stitched with the raven emblem. I wasn't a ghost here. I was an observer outside time. The voices were clear. "Aleric Thorne," intoned a judge, "you stand accused of consorting with witches and betraying the covenant of ravens. How do you plead?" "I plead to truth," he answered, his voice hoarse but steady. "And truth is no man's servant." The crowd murmured. The judge slammed a staff. "Then you confess treason." "I confess reason," Alaric said. "If that is treason, then reason itself stands trial." The torches flared. The image rippled, breaking apart. When it cleared, I was back in the ruin, the mirror dark and cold. The masked figures had withdrawn to the shadows. The leader's voice drifted out. "You have seen his defiance. Will you continue his sin or finish his work?" I tightened my grip on the flashlight. His work was ending you. The candles guttered. The air turned electric. "Then you have chosen," she said. From the darkness, movement, 5 of them stepping forward, raising hands that shimmered with faint blue light. The vibration I'd felt in the farmhouse returned, stronger, thrumming through the ground. The mirror on the platform began to glow, drawing their energy. I lunged toward it, knocking over candles, grabbing the silver frame. The glass blazed white. For an instant I saw faces, Haynes among them, eyes open but empty. Then the light exploded outward, throwing everyone back. When I opened my eyes, the ruins were burning. The masked figures were gone. Only snow falling through smoke remained. I staggered to my car, the mirror clutched against my chest. The drive back to Salem was a blur of darkness and sirens in my head that weren't really there. At Hawthorne Hill, the lights flickered as I entered. The diaries lay open again, words returning like rising ink. He stood before their fire and did not bow. Judgment is not the end, but the gate. I placed the mirror beside them. Its glow subsided, leaving only a faint reflection of me. And behind me, for a heartbeat, Aleric Thorne himself, smiling faintly. Then he was gone, and I was alone again, the quiet humming like distant wings returning to roost. When I woke, daylight blazed through the curtains, too bright, too ordinary. For a moment I believed the night had been a dream, a hallucination born of fatigue. But then I saw the mirror on the floor, cracked across the center, and the ashes of candle wax scattered across the rug. The phone on my desk buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. A voice I didn't recognize said, "You shouldn't have taken it." Static, then silence. I hung up and stared at the mirror. A spider web of fractures cut across its surface, and in those fractures tiny letters shimmered as though etched beneath the glass. Words, Latin, barely legible. Veritas probatur igne. Truth is tested by fire. I traced the crack with a fingertip. The glass pulsed once, faintly warm. The day passed in fragments, reporting Haynes's disappearance again, reviewing footage, trying to hold reality together with evidence, but logic kept slipping. Every photograph I took of the mirror developed wrong, the reflection of my office showing different angles, sometimes with shapes standing where no one was. By evening, I made a decision. If this was Alaric's trial, it was not over, and I would not wait for the Covenant to come to me again. I drove to the police precinct in Salem and asked to speak with Detective Daniel Mercer, a friend from my reporting days. When I laid out what I could prove, missing professor, historical link, cult-like group, multiple locations marked with the same symbol, he leaned back, skeptical but listening. "You're describing a secret society that's 4 centuries old," he said finally. "You really think they're still here?" "I don't think," I said. "I've seen them." Mercer sighed. "All right, give me something verifiable." I slid the cracked mirror across the table. "Run the fingerprints." 2 days later, he called me back. His voice sounded different, tired, wary. "Eleanor, that mirror you gave me, the prints came back as yours and someone else's, but the database flagged them as historical. Thorne, Alaric, died 1671. The line went dead. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my desk, staring at the mirror until my reflection blurred. The fractures caught candlelight, dividing my face into fragments. Then one shard began to glow. Inside it, an image formed. A candlelit chamber I'd never seen. Walls lined with books. A man's hand turned a page. The handwriting was Alaric's. The voice that followed wasn't from outside, but inside my head. "They will call you heretic, as they called me. But you must bring the record to its end. The circle cannot remain half-closed." The vision faded, leaving my own reflection, staring back, terrified. Morning. Mercer didn't answer his phone. I drove to his office. His desk was empty. A note left behind read only, "Ravens Hill, midnight." Not Hawthorne Hill. Ravens Hill, a name I hadn't heard before. I checked old maps. Ravens Hill lay 20 miles west, near the remnants of the original Puritan meeting grounds. One of Alaric's circle points. It felt like a summons. The drive took an hour through sleet and fog. The road wound into woods until GPS lost signal. I parked near a half-collapsed sign. "Ravens Hill Preserve. No entry after dusk." The forest beyond was silent, the snow absorbing sound. My flashlight beam cut narrow tunnels through the dark. Ahead, stone ruins jutted from the earth, foundations of a settlement long gone. Mercer's car waited at the edge of the clearing, engine cold, door open. Inside, his badge lay on the seat beside a black feather. I called his name. The echo came back wrong, too close, as if someone whispered it behind me. I turned. No one. Just beyond the trees, light flickered. Torches again, moving slowly in a circle. Chanting rose, low and rhythmic. I crept closer until I could see them. The same masked figures from the trial, 7 this time, standing around a stone altar carved with the broken circle. In the center lay Mercer, bound but breathing. The woman in the lead mask spoke. "He saw truth. He shall be tested by it. She lifted the cracked mirror. Its fractures gleamed with fire. I stepped from the trees. Let him go. 7 heads turned toward me in perfect unison. The woman lowered the mirror. You return to witness. Good. I raised the flashlight, its beam catching the edges of their masks. I'm not here to witness. I'm here to end it. The nearest figure lunged. I swung the flashlight. The impact shattered the lens, plunging us into near darkness. I caught a glimpse of Mercer rolling away, freeing himself. Then a flash of blue light erupted from the mirror. Energy, static, something beyond comprehension. It knocked the attackers backward. Run, I shouted. Mercer grabbed my arm and together we stumbled through the trees. The chanting behind us rose to a roar. Branches tore at my coat. When we reached the car, the entire hill glowed behind us, a column of light spiraling into the sky before collapsing in on itself. Then silence again. We drove without speaking until the Salem lights appeared through the fog. Mercer's hands shook on the wheel. What the hell were they? Covenant of Ravens, I said quietly. And that was their ritual. They call it the trial of faith. He laughed once, broken. They almost killed us. They would have if Alaric hadn't stopped them. Mercer stared at me, disbelief warring with fear. He's dead, Ellie. I'm not sure death matters anymore. Back at Hawthorne Hill, the burned rings on the floor had faded. The diaries lay open again, new words forming. The circle closes when truth stands without fear. Trial complete, witness chosen. Mercer watched, pale. You're not writing that? I shook my head. It's finishing itself. Outside, the wind rose, carrying the sound of distant wings. For the first time, I didn't feel afraid. This was never about witchcraft, I said. It was about knowledge. What people would kill to protect, and what others would die to keep alive. That's the trial. Mercer looked at me. And you passed? I stared at the diaries, the mirror, the faint hum building in the walls again. We'll find out. Part 5, The Ravens Return. The storm passed, but silence carried its own weight. For 3 days after the trial, Hawthorne Hill stood motionless, as if every nail and beam were holding its breath. Ellie and Detective Mercer lived inside that hush, cataloging evidence and pretending it was routine police work. The charred rings on the floor had cooled to faint scars. The diaries, once alive with shifting ink, were now inert paper. Still, something about the quiet felt rehearsed. Too clean, like a stage reset between acts. Ellie uploaded every file, every recording, to 3 encrypted drives. 2 went to Mercer for safekeeping. The 3rd she kept inside her coat. If the story disappears, she said, so do we. Mercer managed a thin smile. You're talking like a witness protection manual. Just experience. They met in Boston the following morning to trace ownership of the house. The deed, though centuries old, was now held by a nonprofit called the Raven Foundation, headquartered in Beacon Hill. Ellie sifted through corporate filings in the public records room. The same board members appeared under different shell companies, universities, archives, publishing trusts. Each one managed historic preservation projects along the Massachusetts coast. Control the past, Mercer murmured, and you steer belief. By late afternoon, they had enough for a warrant request, but bureaucracy would take weeks. Ellie wasn't patient. She slipped a visitor badge from an unattended desk and walked straight into the foundation's marble foyer. Inside, the air smelled of paper and ozone. Portraits of early American scholars lined the walls. Every frame carried the Raven emblem somewhere in its gilt. A receptionist greeted her warmly. Ms. Hartley, we've been expecting you. That single sentence froze her blood. The receptionist led her into a conference room where a woman waited. Mid-40s, elegant, precise. Dr. Adelaide Crowe. The name landed like thunder. Crowe, the inquisitor whose persecution had forced Aleric Thorne into exile. Adelaide was his descendant. Please sit, she said. You've inherited a heavy subject. Ellie's recorder blinked red inside her pocket. I'm investigating the disappearance of Professor Haynes. Crow smiled. He volunteered. The Foundation preserves what the world isn't ready to handle. Sometimes that preservation requires silence. You're still burning evidence. We're editing history. The distinction keeps civilizations alive. Ellie stood. Truth doesn't need editors. Crow's voice softened. Every witch hunt began with truth seekers, convinced they alone were pure. Be careful which ghost you serve. When Ellie left the building, Mercer was gone. His car still sat at the curb, keys inside, engine cold. On the seat lay his badge and a single black feather. A text pinged on her phone. Raven Hill, midnight. Her chest tightened. She'd seen the phrase before, in Alaric's notes, in the margin of Haynes's file, a meeting place, a judgment. She loaded her gear, camera, flashlight, recorder, and drove west. Raven Hill rose out of fog like a half-built cathedral. What remained of the old meeting hall crouched beneath pine trees, its windows gaping black. Inside, the air reeked of smoke and paraffin. Torches ringed the hall. At the center stood Mercer, unhurt but unarmed, facing a semicircle of Foundation members in dark coats. Crow addressed the room. Our ancestors learned the cost of uncontrolled knowledge. Tonight we decide whether to close the circle forever. Ellie stepped from the doorway, camera raised. This time the world's watching. Crow turned, calm as a judge. Then let it learn what discipline looks like. Two members advanced. Ellie swung a beam of light into their faces, blinding them, and grabbed Mercer's wrist. They ran between pews as shouts erupted. A flare struck a stack of boxes, chemicals igniting in a burst of flame. Sprinklers hissed overhead, smoke turning to steam. The building's fire alarms wailed, transmitting directly to city emergency lines. Ellie shoved Mercer toward the exit. Go! Get this footage out! What about you? Someone has to keep them talking. Crow stood amid the smoke, papers burning around her. Ellie faced her across the rising heat. Everything you've done, Ellie shouted, was to bury proof that your family started a cult. Crow shook her head. We started order. Thorne wanted anarchy, truth without faith, knowledge without guidance. Look what that gave you. Chaos. He gave me evidence. He gave you obsession. Flames climbed the walls. Sirens echoed outside. Ellie hit send on her phone, the live stream connecting to the Bureau's secure channel. Crow realized too late. Her voice, calm and articulate, spilled into the airwaves. We kept the record so humanity could sleep. Firefighters burst through the doors. Crow's followers scattered, some tackled by police already waiting outside. Ellie backed away as the hall collapsed in a wave of sparks. Hours later, wrapped in blankets beside the ambulances, Ellie watched the last embers fade. Mercer sat beside her, coughing smoke but alive. You got it out, he said. She nodded. Every word. By morning, Crow's confession circulated through news feeds. Headlines called it the Raven Foundation scandal. Historians verified Aleric Thorne's diary. The witch hunter's journals became a public archive. Crow faced federal charges for obstruction and illegal document destruction. The foundation dissolved within weeks. Spring thawed the last of the snow around Hawthorne Hill. Ellie returned alone, carrying the surviving diaries and her finished manuscript. The charred rings in the floor were now sealed under glass. Sunlight poured through the windows, clean and undisturbed. She set up her camera for one final recording. My name is Eleanor Hartley. This is the conclusion of the Thorne investigation. 4 centuries ago, a man chose knowledge over fear. People called him heretic. Today we call him witness. May we learn the difference. She paused, closing the diaries gently. Outside, a raven landed on the porch rail, sleek and ordinary. It tilted its head once, then lifted into the sky, vanishing toward the sea. Ellie smiled. Message received. She switched off the camera. Fade to black.